is the road. This is the hill. So we wanted to be able to create a show where people could come here and learn how to stand on their own 2 feet and learn about original principles, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and to formulate and expand their thoughts about their own political opinion, and uh, just learn uh, through the process of asking questions. The guests that we have are usually guests that have a lot of experience in the subject that we're talking about. Today's guest is going to be Joe Peters, who used to be a prosecutor, and he was in law enforcement. He was a police officer, and he's also run for office. He's from Pennsylvania, and he will be with us at the 12 o'clock hour. So, I guess as an opening, I'd like to posit a question, and then I will pass it to Robert and Todd, and I will ask them their opening questions. Um, why does a black life matter only when a white person takes it?
Well,
Like in Chicago
right.
and Detroit and Baltimore.
Yeah, I
In
mean,
response, why did the Minneapolis riots attack the Lake District first? A district primarily built by immigrant and black businesses. These are the questions that we are going to address today. But as an opening, I would like to ask Robert the following. Um, Jesse Kelly said in a tweet this week, the great achievement of the left is the narrative control. When you own so many institutions in America, you can divide people and make them believe anything you want them to believe. That was Jelly Kelly's tweet. Your thoughts, Robert?
yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I've been saying for years. That's what we say on this show all the time. The argument is this: it's not just politics. Andrew Breitbart said that politics is downstream of culture. While Republicans were fighting to win elections, Democrats were fighting to control the culture. And so they infiltrated academia. You can see that the rise of left wing extremism has increased exponentially since 2000 on campuses, to the point now where it's not just that the extreme left wing is the prevailing narrative, it's that you can't even have a right wing thought. That's why they're keeping conservative speakers off campus. There'll be protests to keep conservative speakers. What ends up happening then is when you have a protest that is supposedly a revolution, that's what we're being told, that this is an insurgency. Yet the establishment agrees with the protest. So much so that the same corporations that we could be saying have helped do things like cause poverty and help do things like keep the rest of us, the working class Americans, down, such as banks that got in trouble in the 2008 lending crisis, like Chase Bank, they're out there avoiding being looted because despite harming the black community amongst all other communities, as long as they put Black Lives Matter on their sign, it's okay. And that's what ends up happening. We live in a society where the New York Times, for example, it's the gold standard of media. They literally had to retract an op ed written by Republican Senator Tom Cotton. And the reason that was given was that because Tom Cotton put forth an opinion that 58% of Americans agree with, that if these riots continue, Trump would be justified in sending in the military, that was, quote, enacting violence on the writers of the New York Times. So when you control the narrative that much, now we all have to believe all of these lies. We have to believe that this is an terribly racist country. We have to believe the lie that cops are racist, that are all going out there and hunting and killing unarmed black men. And it not only is just terrible because it points the finger at people that don't deserve it necessarily, such as you're now blaming white people. All white people are inherently racist and things like that. But you actually, when you build your protest on a lie, there is no way to have solutions. And so if the problem is, well, police are all racist and they're all hunting unarmed black men and killing them, and that's not true, how can we ever solve it? And so that's why things like this are inevitable. You're muted, Carlos. Uh, yeah. So Carlos, if you could hear me.
I'm sorry. I'd like to get back to that point where we talk about the punch in the face conversation starter.
Yeah.
America's racist and all cops are racist, and you punch us in the face with that, and then you say, "But let's have a conversation."
Right.
That being said, Todd, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Are we still in quarantine? Is not just personal risk, and whatever happened to the risk of the community, the vulnerable populations, grandma's going to die. How can this virus be so smart that it kills coronavirus protesters, but not Black Lives Matters protesters? Does social justice matter more than social distancing?
Let me look for my mask for a second. I'm not wearing it. I'm not. I still want to protect you. I want you to protect me. I'm not going to do it by wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pandemic's been over for a while. What we're now being subject to are rules, regulations, not necessarily laws, if you will, that have no basis in science, math, or reality. And to that point, we saw it firsthand from one of our elected leaders earlier in the week who threw caution to the wind and went to a protest.
Could you tell us that story in detail, Todd? Tell us that story. Go back to the beginning with respect to the questions that you've asked the governor at these press conferences, and touch upon what his comments were with regards to protesters for the coronavirus and how that juxtaposed to the protests of the George Floyd protests.
So in mid-May, amid the lockdown of the state and the closure of businesses and the stay-at-home orders, right? The governor was quite outspoken about, chances that people were taking about going out and protesting, and especially on the Capitol steps. And Dr. Levine was, very open about, you're putting yourself in danger. There's significant risk. You could contract the virus. There could be community spread, right? Well, all of that seemed to go out the window this past Wednesday, when, as I'm walking into Pima headquarters and preparing to begin to see social media light up with the governor walking in a protest in Harrisburg, literally arm in arm, no social distancing, however, wearing a mask, arm in arm with protesters about what's going on nationally. And I very pointedly asked Secretary Levine, Dauphin County is in yellow. Not to mention they're under a stay-at-home order until June 4th, June 5th. So these are obviously and apparent violations of the governor's order and her order. And her response was to the effect that the administration has never objected to anyone protesting. Well, this show's called Pushback. I pushed back yesterday on the governor and said, Governor, you marched in a protest on Wednesday. No one's trying to take away from your, ability to protest. However, you're marching in violation of your and Secretary Levine's own order. And he absolutely owned the fact that he had done that, why he had done that, and said the phrase, I was inconsistent on that. And I'm not going to tip my hand to what's coming up on Monday in that press conference, the questions I'll be posing to Secretary Levine and the governor, if he again joins us on Monday, and some of the follow-ups that I'll be asking of the governor and of the secretary. And I got to tell you, fellas, it is the absolute honor of a lifetime, an honor of a lifetime and a privilege to be in that room face-to-face with the Secretary of Health, with the cabinet members, with the governor in the front row. I'm not sitting in the back. I'm not hiding behind a keyboard, right? They took it to the virtual side. We've been doing that since mid-March. The first opportunity I had to be in the room, they gave me the opportunity to be in the room and face real questions. It's the absolute honor of a lifetime.
So let me give you some context as to why it's an honor of a lifetime for you. It's because you earned that position, correct, Robert?
Right. And Todd, can you let people know, what's your background in journalism? What were you into? Were you someone who has came up and made your bones like discussing these sorts of issues with politicians? That's not really what you were an expert in, correct? You were more in the sports side of things.
Correct. Yeah. My early career, I interned at a rock and roll station in Canton, Ohio, and then got a break in Cleveland to be an intern and covered 2 World Series, one as an intern and then one as an on-air talent in in Cleveland at the Indians flagship, that was huge for me. But what it did was it really laid the groundwork for later in life treating, elected officials and getting ready for debate. It taught me the preparation side, that you have to be prepared for a game to go call it. And I do a lot of play-by-play at multiple levels, right? I've done that for the better part of 20 years. But I've always been a student of history. Right?
Well, the reason I bring this up is going to what Carlos' question to me was, what is the power of one side controlling the narrative? No one asked these questions until you did. If you weren't there, we would not have got this concession by Tom Wolfe. And I find it appalling that it took someone like you, because you had a background where you're not intimidated. You're not partisan, where you feel, oh, I can't ask this question. I don't want to make Tom Wolfe look bad. It took an outsider like you to get in the room and say, hey, we're going to ask some pointed questions about you violating your own orders. And I think that goes to show the power of controlling the media and controlling the narrative. If we don't have people like you in there, then none of these questions and none of these contradictions will be pointed out.
Robert, here to your point and to Carlos's question earlier, Dave Latour is Tom Ridge's former press secretary. Okay, he's the guy that at the time Governor Corbett hired to go to Penn State in the aftermath of Jerry Sandusky to do crisis management. Dave Latour's got a very active social media presence, very active on Twitter. He, on Wednesday, about an hour after the press conference concluded with Secretary Levine, he cut up the 68-second video of my question in its entirety, Secretary Levine's response, and then at the end, when Secretary Levine said to April Hutchinson, there's another question in the back of the room, so I was unable to ask an in-the-moment follow-up, which that will be addressed later on, okay? But it has been seen right before our show today almost 350,000 times.
Yeah.
And Dave's comment was, this is why you have actual reporters in the room asking real questions. And I got to tell you, to see the questions and the answers that are being populated all over media in this state and nationally from the questions that I'm posing, I'm a big attribution guy. I really, really am, right? But if they're going to pick up, the other media members are going to pick it up and run with it and do that, I'm good. Right? I've got the story. Everybody knows I got the story. I have the video to prove it. You can hear me audibly asking those questions. I'm totally okay with it. And you see me on camera posing those tough questions. And I'm not going to stop. Every chance I get to be in the room, I'm going to keep asking those questions. And you know what's been amazing to me? The in-person interactions with the press staff and getting to know each other over this pandemic. There is a great mutual respect going on right now between the staff, myself, the dialogue that's going back and forth, right? I'm not being disrespectful about it.
Right.
And they know that. I'm not doing this. And Carlos, to your point from earlier in the week on a social media post, I'm not in this to make a name for myself. I'm in that room to ask questions on behalf of myself, Robert, Carlos, my family, fellow Pennsylvanians, citizens of the world, the class of 2020 last night that we watched graduate. That's why I'm in that room.
And let me just real quick.
Before you do though, Robert, hold on. We have a technical difficulty on the talkwinnersport.com site. I just sent you a text. If you could take a look at it, and then let me talk to Robert while you work on that. Robert, the governor owned it, as Todd said. That's good, right?
No. I mean, yes, in a sense. It's good that he owned up to it, but it's like a fake mea culpa. Listen, here's the deal. Let's not beat around the bush. We know that as a Democrat, there is no way Tom Wolfe could have said anything critical about these current protests going on. Cannot happen. Heck,
what would have happened? What would have happened?
He would be drummed out of the party. He would be called a racist. He would be drummed out of the party.
So they would come to get him too.
Right. That's exactly right. There would be, and you could actually say pragmatically, it would probably cause more protests with the potential to be violent against his office. Right.
That would turn it violent, is what you're saying.
It could, right? So let's give the most charitable possible explanation. So before Todd asked this question Wednesday, here's what Todd knows walking into it. This is what we all knew. That Tom Wolf was critical of people that wanted to open and go back to their jobs and things like that. And he said that they were cowards. And he said that they would lose their license to operate their businesses. And he said they were jeopardizing everyone's life, right? And then when it came to these current protests, he said, we should try to social distance, but these are good things. Now, that's bad enough. But you could, if you're being charitable, say, well, Tom Wolf had to say that. He had, because he couldn't come out and say, yeah, these protests are also cowardly because it could have led to violence. But that does not explain him violating his own order. The fact that he personally went out and violated his own order is what becomes particularly egregious. And the other thing is, this is why I don't buy his apology as mea culpa now, is he could have came out initially and said, listen, on May 11th, when he made the comments about the lockdown protest and the people that wanted to open up, he could have said, I totally get your frustration. Many great people are losing their businesses. I get it. But please, for the safety of us all, please try to understand that we have to stay locked down a little longer. He didn't. He said, you're a coward. We will take your business. If you break my order, you will face consequences. He threatened CARES Act funding, which for those of you who don't know, he literally, the reason that the federal government's sending this funding is because they're saying, well, COVID's so bad and the lockdown was so bad, so normal Americans need this money. Tom Wolf threatened to withhold that from Americans that need it if the politicians in their county disagreed with Tom Wolf. I cannot think of a more tyrannical.
Just clarification: the discretionary funds that he had access to distribute, that's what he said he'd hold back. Everything that was going to the hospital, all the UC funding, that all stayed.
Oh, yeah.
Any discretionary CARES Act funding.
Right. And he threatened, he also said, and if you look at that statement, this is what he's directly talking to county level people that wanted to end the lockdown in their counties. And the way that he goes after them, he says, understand this, average Pennsylvania who's in these counties. If your county commissioner does something I don't like, I will take your license. Right. I will take the discretionary funding going to your county. So he threatened people and then personally did the very same thing that he was threatening people. So for him to just come out and say, you're right, that was inconsistent, that's garbage. The reason that he did it, you're trying to tell me he didn't know it was inconsistent when he did it? He did it for a photo op. He did it because he wanted to virtue signal. And meanwhile, the photo op's great that he took, isn't it? Where he's standing right next to someone holding a sign that says Blue Lives Matter. So if you're listening and you're a member of the police, remember that. The person that's in charge of civilian oversight of you thinks that you're a murderer. Yeah, and he thought it was worth getting a photo op for that.
And Robert, to your point, there, and he was asked this yesterday by Penn Live, where was the state police commissioner? Where were the members of law enforcement standing shoulder to shoulder, side by side? And he basically dismissed it and said, well, it was my announcement. They didn't need to be there.
Right. We consulted, but, they don't need to be here.
But he did.
So what he basically said is like, look, the coronavirus protests were illegal and racist, but George Floyd protesters were essential. That was basically the position Governor Wolf took with the state of Pennsylvania. And tell me the difference between the tyranny of the governor and the tyranny of Derek Chauvin.
Well, what Chauvin, for those of you who don't know, that's the officer that murdered George Floyd.
Sorry.
That's okay. What Chauvin did, right, it is a particularly emotionally wrecking, heinous act because we see in video, you get to see someone's life removed. You see them murdered. And that stirs emotional reaction in you. And it's terrible and it's heinous and I make no excuse for it. And he should be prosecuted, right? However, the difference is we're talking about not murder, but we're talking about a tyrannical government that's inflicting pain intentionally on people, taking away their livelihood, and it's at a mass scale, not just at a single person. So both of them are tyrannical. Both of them are people in positions of enforcement that are engaged in double standards, that are breaking the own rules that they are told to uphold. And in the case of Tom Wolf and all of these other people that have been, because by the way, let's not kid ourselves. We're in Pennsylvania. These hypocritical leaders, like again, remember, trust the experts. We have to trust the doctors. The University of Washington, their team was one of the big teams that was relied on by our federal government talking about COVID and how to treat it. They were just part writers and with co-signers of 1,200 other medical experts that said, yes, COVID's still going to kill us all. It's still going to kill a bunch of people, so you still can't go to work. We still have to have the lockdown. But protesting the murder of George Floyd is fighting a bigger virus, the virus of white supremacy. So it's okay.
We'll decide who has the right to protest. And
so you could see you could see that it was a lie. I mean, if it's real, if the COVID thing's still real, and that's what's the most infuriating. I was against the lockdown. Everybody knows that's listening to this show. But at least if it was in good faith, you could deal with it. But the fact that these people are like, when they looked at you and said, you're a coward if you want to go to your job. You're a coward if you want to provide for your family. We'll punish you. There will be consequences. You're going to kill us all. When they said that to you, and then in the same breath, they're like, oh, and everyone who wants to protest one person being murdered states over, you guys are heroes. You're fantastic. You're not risking anyone's life. It goes to show you that this is what we're talking about when we're talking about controlling the narrative. They control the narrative so much that they're able to cover up for the fact that this was a naked power grab by people like Tom Wolf and others in the Democratic Party. I believe it was to not only help win an election, but it's also to help destabilize this country and harm the working class. Muted.
Are you back, Todd?
I'm back. And
So,
the
what do
issue
you
that
think
you
is
had
gonna-
sent out has been sent out as well.
Thank you.
And should be resolved here any minute.
Okay, so what happens next, media-wise, with respect to the governor and what he's going to do next week? What do you anticipate he's going to say and do to move forward? Where do you think he's going? And then, Robert, if you can comment on the political overtones of that decision that you think Todd is going to predict.
So if you could defer to Robert for just 1 second as I'm troubleshooting that issue. Okay, ask me that question again.
What do you think the governor is going to do next in Pennsylvania? And then, Robert, if you can comment on the political implications of whatever he does.
Okay, I think the lockdown is going to end. I think we're going to be in perpetual green until the state legislature can override and get I think it's 3/4 as opposed to like 66, 67%. I think it's got to be 75, 80% to override any potential vetoes of the governor. If they can break the Philly voting block on the Democrat side of the aisle to overcome anything he's going to veto to get us out of green, because I got to tell you, if the new norm is based on vaccine, which I was able to have Secretary Levine admit to earlier this week and put on the record for the first time that is the new threshold, right, to move beyond green. That is a long way off, right,
Years,
in the distance. I'm sorry. If you're letting kids go back to school and we have colleges reopening, everything else, there's not going to be social distancing,
No.
right? You can't force somebody to wear a mask at school, right? That's going to cause issues.
Right.
2 questions, Robert. 2 questions.
Can I ask Todd something real quick that I hear people asking?
They wear masks for a living.
People want to know, Todd, they want to know what was the conversation with reporters before you went in Wednesday to ask that question? Because I know I'd talked to you. You're standing outside, you're ready to go in to have this press conference, and all of a sudden, 15 minutes beforehand, you and all the reporters find out that Governor Wolf's at this protest, directly violating his own law. What was the conversation with the other reporters, and what did they say afterwards when you actually asked the question?
Well, the first thing was, well, I guess he's not going to be here today, right? That was the first reaction. And then after that was, he's at a protest. Like it struck everybody as, wait a minute, we've all been told to stay in our homes and not do anything, and just the reactions were, pretty stunning for the media members and the folks that were closest to me. I said, well, pretty much the effect of, well, somebody needs to ask him, right? Meaning the governor, right? At some point, somebody needs to ask the governor, what are you doing? So the thought was that he might join the meeting via Skype or remotely or whatever. So we end up with the Secretary of Health, and I'm like, I heard a couple questions, and I'm like, okay, somebody's got to ask the question. I'm going to be the guy that asked the question. And you could just tell, and if you watch it again on video, it's out there a lot, the reaction of the secretary, okay, who Dr. Levine and I have built quite the working relationship during the pandemic, right? All of the questions that I have thrown at Secretary Levine on a near daily basis for 2.5, almost 3 months. She knows I'm not being disrespectful. I'm being quite fair in my questions. I'm looking for as much information as I can get. And then the reaction in real time was, we're not saying folks don't have the right to protest. We've never said people don't have the right to protest, which I understand that. But then to see that she pointed right over my head and said to April Hutchinson in the room going, there's another question in the back of the room, you could tell it was a very uncomfortable moment.
You got her.
Well, and let me ask you, just point blank, had you not asked that question, would one of the other reporters?
I doubt it.
And this is what I want to get across to the audience, right? The reporters know. They know that it's a big deal. And then afterwards, they kind of were like, hey, you need to be in these pools more often, right? So what's holding them back? If they know these are relevant questions, why are they refusing to ask them?
Well, can I just interject real quick? Can you expand on that point, Robert? And talk about your displeasure as what our leaders are doing and our political leaders are doing and not pushing back to that type of stuff. They know what the problems are. They know what the questions that need to be asked. Why aren't they doing it? And then to Todd.
Because the narrative is so controlled now by people that endorse these policies that it's not just that everyone's ridiculously corrupt. Please don't think that that's what I'm saying. There are people leading this narrative that are corrupt, but it's allowed to occur because of the cowardice of the people that won't check it. It's the same reason that we're building this lie. Oh, the police are all racist, because people that know better, we know. People know that this is garbage, but you're afraid to speak up. It's the same reason that we had even Republicans that wouldn't speak up against the injustices of the lockdown. It's because they are cowards. And these people in the media, they want to go along to get along. They don't want to, like, I'm sure, Todd, you don't really want to be in the position where you're getting a lot of heat from people that think, oh, you like your story with Myrtle Beach. You're getting all sorts of heat because you stepped out of your comfort zone and asked questions that a journalist should be asking. So that's difficult. It's difficult to be in that position where, okay, now you're getting attacked in several ways. These reporters are just like, well, you know, either they agree with the narrative and so they're purposely pushing the narrative and hiding questions, or they're too cowardly to speak up against it.
Todd, how do you do your job when nobody trusts you? How do governors and mayors and presidents lead when nobody trusts them? Nobody trusts government and the media. Am I right? Tell me I'm wrong. Maybe I'm looking at it from the wrong. So my take on it is the only way I can get you to trust me is to be completely unvarnished. Does that make sense? Or what's your take on that?
So here's the prism that I look at this through, right? The framers, when they put the Constitution together, put the greatest country on the planet together, right? They came up with the idea of, you know, governments of the people, by the people, for the people, right? Came up with that idea. And within that is the freedom of the press. And part of the freedom of the press was to keep the government at every level in check. It's part of the checks and balances. We would agree?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So for me to do my job effectively, I have to challenge what the government is telling me. It's no different than me reaching out to the chief of police in Williamsport and the mayor in the city of Williamsport when there's a protest last weekend. Did you get a permit for the protest? Because what ended up transpiring needed to have a permit. Whether they want to cite whatever they want to cite with breaking news or whatever else, they needed to have a permit.
And
okay.
Carlos, you're muted again. And just let me real quick say that, you know, I think that that's something that's important to look at with these protests and stuff. The argument is that somehow this is a revolution and it's counterculture. But it's not a revolution if the people at the top are endorsing you. And so when the narrative and the lie coming from the people at the top is, take COVID, right? We have to have the shutdowns and all of this. It's not revolutionary to say, yes, I'm protesting against those who want to end the lockdown. When everyone's saying Black Lives Matter, when I could turn on Amazon or Netflix and see everyone saying, yes, Black Lives Matter and police are racist and this is a systemically racist country, it's not counterculture to then say, I'm marching with Black Lives Matter. And so I think that that's what the adversarial nature of the press is important, regardless of what ideology or what political party's in power. You need an adversarial press. And we see that because of the control of the narrative, I blame particularly that on the establishment left, but it's establishment in all senses. There could be people on the right this is true of as well. Because the establishment has controlled that narrative, they haven't faced an adversarial press. And so instead we're told, you have to trust the experts and you want to kill grandma if you don't want to lock down. And if you're against these riots and stuff, well, then you don't care about Black lives. And it's ridiculous. If we had more journalists that were actually asking these pertinent questions, I think more people would wake up. Hopefully that's what we're trying to do with our show.
So
Carl,
when you
before go any further, I just got a breaking news alert. Two things real quick. It's actually with the technical issue you asked me about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
They're now into a deep dive, and I think the timing of this is quite interesting. That 350,000 plus views of a question I posed earlier this week, and the day we're doing this show, the live stream is there for folks to go get the audio, but the content on the website right now, this is the issue. You can't access the website right now. That's the issue Carlos is talking about.
I noticed that, yeah.
Because the server's been crashed. There's so many people going to the server right now to get the content and consume the content. You've swamped the server. So my IT guy right now is losing his mind behind the camera right now, trying to figure out what's going on and do the deep dive. So thank you very much for crashing our server on the website. Thank you very kindly, and it will be rectified here as the day progresses. But two of the Buffalo police officers involved in the clearing of the square, if you will, the other day, have now been charged with assault. This is, I believe, a day or 48 hours removed from more than 50 police officers resigning from their special response team, not leaving the police force, but leaving the special response team in the Buffalo Police Department. And so to your point, this may come up Monday, Wednesday, or Friday of next week in Harrisburg with what has just been said by Governor Wolf and Attorney General Shapiro with reviewing what they plan to do with law enforcement under their purview going forward in the state of Pennsylvania. If you're now going to tell law enforcement, clear a square, something happens, and then law enforcement's charged with assault, what's in it for somebody to be a police officer, state trooper, sheriff, law enforcement officer going forward?
Let me take that question.
Job, and then you can't do your job.
Let me take that question real quick, and let's be fair about how we frame this. Okay, let's do it honestly. Here was the order: clear the plaza. That was the order. Clear the plaza. We cleared the plaza, but you don't like the way we cleared the plaza. That's why they resigned. I don't think that they resigned basically because the two guys got suspended without pay. That's not why they resigned. They resigned because you told us to clear the plaza. We cleared the plaza, and now you're playing politics. See, they resigned because they didn't trust the brass. They didn't trust the politicians who gave them the order. That's why they resigned, not because someone got suspended. Well, not 57 of them.
Well, right, but it's not just. I don't think if you could ask them, I don't think they would have resigned if there was an investigation into these officers for what happened. They resigned because things like this happened. They were immediately suspended without pay. The police union lawyers refused to represent them. Right? And so it wasn't, I don't think that these cops would be like, hey, you're looking at this internally, that's fine. Or you're looking at this internally, we're upset about that because we are ordered to clear the plaza, we resign. Because clearly, if you're ordered to clear the plaza, that doesn't mean you could just go in there with your gun just shooting people. You can't do that, right? So the cops implicitly understand just because they're ordered to clear the plaza means that there's still a code that they have to follow. They can't use undue force or anything like that. So they're upset about the treatment. But let me just be clear on what happened here. That old man, for those of you who don't know, there's an old man. He approaches the officers. They keep telling him to move. He doesn't. It looks like the old man maybe reaches for the officer. I don't think he was in a threatening manner. I think he was maybe going to put his hand on the officer, and an officer shoves him. Now, he didn't shove him hard right into the ground. He pushed him a little, and the old man had a lack of balance, and he stumbles back like 5 steps, falls, hits his head, starts bleeding everywhere. This was not undue force. It's tragic, right? It is tragic, but they were ordered to clear the plaza, and someone wouldn't move. If you have a problem, it's with the policy of ordering them to clear the plaza. What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to just go, oh, this man doesn't want to leave? Right, and like, I've been debating left-wing people all week. They want to act like anytime the police use tear gas or that they clear a crowd, that is violence, which justifies violence against the police. What's happening, though, is because you've set up a situation where the narrative is encouraged rioting and the media refuses to report on it, or if they do, they say, well, actually, sometimes violence is justified, and actually the looting isn't violence. When they start saying stuff like that, you set the situation up where police are going to be in violent situations with these people. Inevitably, there's going to be people hurt. If there's a cop that engages in complete egregious behavior, fine, point them out to me. We could discuss what should happen. They should be held to the fullest extent of the law. But stop pretending like you could selectively take, oh, here's one image of a cop doing something bad, and that's somehow indicative of, oh, this is a police state. What that's indicative of is when you intentionally inflame the situation and create a situation where violent people are going against the police, that there are non-violent people that will get caught up in that, and that's horrific.
Yes, but more importantly, you both of you know my thesis about unforced errors, and now with Todd's news, the city's charging them with assault. There's no end to this. Can you talk about, Robert, and then pass it to Todd? Mm-hmm. Talk about the unfunding and dismantling of the police department in Minneapolis?
Yeah, so Talib and Ilhan Omar and others, including some people that are on the city council, have suggested that they're going to fundamentally transform the police department, and they're talking about the need to defund the police. Now, look, this isn't an argument that's being made of like, hey, the police cruisers are a little more expensive than they need to be. Let's take back some funds. They're saying this in response to the police are the problem. Therefore, we need to defund or eliminate them. This is a huge mistake. And it goes, again, this goes along. When you're dishonest about what the problem is, you can't get a solution. So here's what will happen. If you defund the police, already we see that there's a lack of people wanting to get into the criminal justice system and law enforcement. We can see through things like the Ferguson effect. When you've demonized police, what happens is they just stop policing neighborhoods. And then what happens? Well, check out inner city Baltimore. Check out inner city Chicago. When police are no longer able or willing to go into communities, homicides go through the roof. Now remember, let's keep this in context. Last year, only 9 unarmed blacks were shot by police. Of those situations, 5 of them were directly involved in attacking police when they were shot. The idea that all unarmed people that are shot are somehow to murder, I mean, that's ridiculous. For example, one of the incidents was a black woman police officer who was being choked to death by a suspect, and she fired and killed that suspect. Yet we're supposed to look at that as somehow this justifies the protest or riots, because this is proof that somehow police are killing unarmed black people. Meanwhile, police officers were 18 times more likely to be killed by black men than they were to have killed an unarmed black man last year. So when we're talking about defunding the police, what that does is this is another attempt to destroy this country, to destroy the actual regular hardworking people. And if you have a question about it, remember, the people that are justifying this and saying defund the police, or the people that are saying, well, the looting and the rioting, a little of it's okay, they're not recommending it happens in their town, are they?
No, the left doesn't want you to riot in their neighborhood.
Right, and so
you can riot in deplorable neighborhoods.
If armed security and police are the problem, then why don't we see every senator or every person that's saying defund the police tell the security that's in their gated communities, hey, hit the bricks, we don't want you.
Right.
Because they know that law enforcement and that security is important. But we have to pretend like, oh, no. All of these problems are caused by police. By the way, this is what I'll say. If you're a police officer listening, I would tell Tom Wolfe the next time that he needs a protection detail, sorry, we're busy. We're taking a sick
busy.
day. And
Busy.
I say that these communities, hey, Minneapolis, you want to get rid of the police? Fine. Well, here's what Trump should do. He should say, we'll offer the National Guard if you're one of these cities being overran. If you refuse to accept it, great. You can get rid of your police department, do whatever you want. You will no longer get a dime of federal funding. If you want to leave your city burned down, by all means, let it burn down. And then the good people there will get fed up and start to elect different leadership. But until then, I'm sorry. I'm not going to buy this argument that if we just get rid of or defund the police, that will solve all the problems.
Todd, and on Gutfeld, I guess it was yesterday, this issue came up, and he said, well, if you believe that the police should be defunded and dismantled, then you should 911 should block you, and there should not be you should not be allowed to be able to buy a gun. Your thoughts on just Gutfeld is just awesome because he needles them and he makes them think. What would happen if 911 blocked you and you weren't allowed to buy a gun because you believe that the police defunded you? Or you believe that we should defund the police and will not have it? Your thoughts on defunding and dismantling?
Well, we actually have a real world example here in Williamsport. Recently is last fall that you have the school resource officer in, member of the Williamsport Bureau of Police, Jody Miller, standing down 911 and a call from a concerned parent going to a fight that turned into a 25, 30 person riot in a parking lot. He stood him down, standing next to the principal. We got it covered. Hey, car 54, we got it covered. Stood him down.
One Adam 12.
What are you doing? Right. Oh, by the way, that was called out by me in stories. Right. And I'm the bad guy.
Yep.
Right.
Well, they're not going to want you to come to their neighborhood.
I'm pretty consistent that way. Right. Bad policing is bad policing. Now, that said, not every cop in uniform or out of uniform is bad. He said it. I can't believe he said it. I'm looking over my shoulder. Hold on. I'm looking over my shoulder. Hold on.
What's the difference between a racist police officer and a depraved, homicidal psychopath? Robert?
Yeah, I mean, the question, this is the question, what proof is there that the guy that killed George Floyd's a racist? None.
Well, he was charged, so let's stick to the facts, right? It's their facts, okay? I'm not going to change the wind. I'm not going to bitch about the wind. I'm just going to set my sails. So they charged him with second-degree murder, which means that the Attorney General in Minnesota believes that Derek Chauvin intended to murder George Floyd. Is there evidence of that?
I don't think so. I mean, I have no love for the person who did this. He deserves
no
to be
way.
punished.
And in no way are we saying that what this guy did is right. I want him to friggin' fry. But there are worse things of this guy not frying, like charging him with the wrong charge and then finding him innocent and then more rioting. See, there can be worse things. So why don't we do things right the first time? Why charge him with second degree from third degree they initially charged him with third degree, they moved it up to second degree. Why did they do that, Robert?
And if you need an example, Robert, before you respond real quick, see the Freddie Gray case in Baltimore and see how that turned out from a charging standpoint. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know why they did it. It was the virtue signal. It was try to be appeasing the mob, which in its own right is a danger. If we're going to start saying, well, we'll overcharge people, or we're going to blame on, we're just going to say racism. We're going to say that this was about racism because that's what's appeasing to the mob. Is that really the precedent we want to set? Because what's going to happen when the other side decides to play that game? Does that mean that people that were protesting the lockdown who were losing their livelihood, did they have the right to become a mob? I don't think so. I think that if we start down that path and we start to say, if you want political power or if you want law enforcement and laws to bend the knee and to not be applied equally based on who's going to have the biggest mob, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. And let me just say real quick, I want to, on a point we were making in the question before this, I want to just make this clear. the same people that say, well, the police shouldn't be dealing with this, the police force is unjustified and we shouldn't have the police out there defending people, right? The same ones who say that are also saying, I have a problem with the Second Amendment and you shouldn't arm yourself. And then when all of that fails, so these people didn't arm themselves during the riots, they're not fighting back really, and they're saying, oh, we don't want the police there, they're escalating the situation. So what's the alternative? Send in the National Guard? No, they're against that. They say it's tyranny. So what these people are telling you is you have no right to defense, period. You don't have a right to defend yourself. You don't have a right to have the government defend you. What they want is lawlessness. They want their side to be able to do whatever they want. They want you to totally bend the knee to them. And that is outrageous, and we should all fight against it.
Todd?
Yes.
So, going back to the original question, tell me what happens next week with respect to what you think the governor is going to do. How is he going to modulate this? How is he going to set his sails and based on what you've seen in the last 3 months?
So there's some preparation being undertaken
So specifically with the protesters. Let's set aside the coronavirus for right now. You can address it if you want, but specifically what your thoughts are on the protesters and what the governor is going to do, and then maybe you can roll into the coronavirus and what do you think he's going to do there?
Yeah. So now the dynamics change, right? The coronavirus is now arguably behind us, right? These press conferences now are dealing with what's going on in the moment with protesting and rioting and looting and that response, right? That's what this is now transitioned to. And I have a question that I'm preparing for the governor and Secretary Levine, if either chooses to answer, which I'm sure they will. I'm not being, I'm not asking in a derogatory way. I want a clarification on something, and I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to give anything else away. But what's very interesting to me, guys, is to hear another media member walk in the room yesterday, get the first question, right, and talk about a question I'd already asked about what's life look like after Green. And as they walked in and we're kind of chit-chatting before the thing, as the person walked in, identified themselves, they go, well, I'm a patriot now. I'm a patriot now. What? Like, we're media members. We're supposed to be people asking questions. We're not supposed to be taking sides. We're just supposed to be asking questions. Right. That's the job. Right? But now to characterize themselves as a patriot, I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, the name of the show, right, is Pennsylvania Patriots Radio, right? That's the name of the show that we came up on. And it came up with, now it's pushed back, right? It all goes to the same thing. We're asking questions. If you want to call that being a patriot, if you want to call it being a knucklehead, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to stop. There's some amazing news that we have coming probably this week and into next that nobody ever saw coming, ever. For this show, what's going forward, things in my life. I've had amazing conversations with friends for more than 20 years. I've had conversations with friends in the last 24 hours about race relations in this country. And Governor Wolf, Secretary Levine, I'm going to tell you, there's a group of people that are rising up right now that want to take this country in a very positive direction. And part of that group is the class of 2020, because they don't see inherent bias on a daily basis. It's not part of their vocabulary. It's just not. And that's where the change starts, right there.
Carlos, you're muted again. I'll just say real quick, like the idea, if we've already agreed that the founding fathers and one of the core principles of this country is holding truth to power, a free press actually asking the powerful questions, then by definition, the mere act of being a journalist would be patriotic. So how stupid is it to use it as somehow a partisan or derogatory term to you? Like, right. So you're not being patriotic by being a member of the Free Press? So then what are you doing?
Now you're being patriotic, right?
You know, it's so dumb. That's such a dumb point.
But to the question, because I want to move on. What is predict for me what the governor is going to do next week, if you can. That's what I'm interested in. What's he going to do tomorrow?
I think they're going to. Here's what I think is going to happen. They're going to continue to push back on the fact that they tried to call anybody a coward.
Okay.
It was when the phrase was it was a cowardly act was uttered in the speech that Governor Wolf gave. I said it in the moment. I said that was a very ill-timed, ill-placed word in that set of remarks. You could have said a lot of things. The moment you say cowardly act,
yes,
and people are locked down and you're taking their livelihoods from them, that's going to get pushed back immediately, and it did, right?
Wayward righteousness.
Not to mention
now they're going to have to do some damage control. That's the first thing they're going to do. You have me in the room, and it's going to be very interesting. The dynamic in the room is now changing.
Right.
Okay.
Because
so now,
you've
emboldened people. Be in the
room,
who else is going to be asking those kind of probative questions?
Right. Because you've emboldened people. Robert, with respect to the fact that we feel that the governor is appeasing these people, is it racism for whites to attend black protests in hopes of appeasement and stopping the chaos? Is that racism?
Arguably. I mean, one of the things we
You understand what I'm asking you?
Yes. So, like, here's how
I'm going to go join them to virtue signal how much I care about them. Isn't that racism?
It could be, but I mean, it depends on your motivation. But let me say this:
there's the word I'm looking for.
Right, and there's an implicit, like, no one wants to have these real conversations, right? Let me ask you this: why do we see all across the country where there are these riots going on? Why are businesses putting minority owned in the window? Why are businesses putting Black Lives Matter? It's because they know their chances of being physically attacked decrease if they are a certain skin color.
Right, the Passover Exodus effect.
That's exactly right. Now, we can't talk about that. If we say that, we have to say, oh, no, that it's all peaceful protesters, and to the extent that they're rioters, it's probably Trump-supporting white supremacists, or it's just a bunch of opportunists. Now, don't get me wrong. Let me be straight up with you. Anytime we have a situation set up where riots have been enabled or that they're being ignored, extremists from all groups will get involved in that. I guarantee white supremacists right now are applauding, saying, yes, please continue burning down those black neighborhoods. Which is the irony, because the leftist elite people that I know that live in the suburbs or live in rural areas and talk about pre-non about how, oh, you don't understand systemic racism and how these riots are justified. They would be the first people calling the police crying if the rioters came to their home. But they're more than happy to suggest the rioters burn down black neighborhoods. And that's the kind of bigotry, and that, to me, those are all racist statements. And there's this lack of agency that we tend to give to black people, at least a lot of people in the elites, that I find appalling. My argument is we should treat everyone as people, regardless of their skin color. Their argument is things like this. I'm telling you, Carlos, I just debated 7-8 hours of at least 6 left-wing people where this was the official statement. None of the riots occurred until the police enforced the riots to occur. So everything was peaceful, and then the police shot tear gas. And I'm like, but wait a minute. We literally see people beating shop owners nearly to death or literally killing security guards. Is your argument that the people that did that were peaceful, and then they got tear gas in their eyes and they said, well, now I have no choice. Now I have to beat this shop owner. We need to stop pretending like, oh, well, if there's violence occurring in this community, it must not be because they're violent. It must be because of other reasons. Now, are there reasons to look at it as why these communities are more violent? Of course. But I'm sick and tired of the fact that we can't have a serious conversation. Someone explain to me why when I'm talking to someone on the left, I have to make this point. Without even thinking about it, I have to say, they're burning down the businesses of minority-owned businesses. Because I implicitly know if I say, look, they're burning down businesses, they'll say, well, who cares? Who cares if they burn down Target? Who cares if they burn down a bunch of capitalist white supremacists, systemic white supremacists? I mean, it's nonsense. And that's the type of stuff that's racism. There can be racism that occurs going the opposite direction, where all of a sudden we say, again, the narrative in this country right now, the dominant narrative that's being pushed all through our schools is, if you were born a certain skin color, you have sin. You are evil because of your ancestors. That's racism. Saying that someone's inferior or immoral based on their skin color is racism. And I don't care how many academics sit here and try to tell me, oh, no, it's because blah, 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 blah. No, if you're judging someone and their morality based on their skin color, you're a racist.
So what I want you to clarify, and this is really important, I think, for us, and 5 minutes until Joe calls in, Todd, so be aware. Every single, without exception, every single political group is trying to take advantage of the protesters who are authentically protesting George Floyd's death. Every single one. Can you name two or three from each side, and sides that we don't even know about? I know that you're very interested in all these type of groups, but give a quick 2-minute roundup on who the people that are involved are that are causing problems for the people who are authentically protesting the death of George Floyd, because there is a difference, correct?
You there, Todd?
Yeah, is that to me or to Robert?
It's to Robert first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, there are people of all sides that are doing so. The people that protesting, let's not be confused. I disagree with the narrative, and I think that racial division's being caused. So I agree with the right to be outraged and protest over the death of George Floyd. Totally agree. But the fact that
we all do.
Right. The fact that we're making it racial is specifically so that the people in power that allow these policies and allow the attacks and the massive decline of the middle and working class in this country of all colors, they know that they could avoid serious criticism if they cause division based on superficial things such as race. They do it with race. They do it with gender. They do it with sexual preference. They do it with religion. This is what they do. They cause division, so we argue with each other and we don't focus on them and how their policies haven't been beneficial to the average American for decades. So there are legitimate protesters that I support, but I think that the racial angle of it is wrong. But I still support their ability to protest. Who's taking advantage of this? Look, yes, there will be right-wingers that say are, white supremacists that want this to occur. Yes, there will be people of all political persuasions that do. But let's be honest what's going on the ground. There are basically the bulk of the people we see committing the violence fall into two categories. One, it's the category of opportunist and people that think it's a game and people that think that it's fun to go out and cause carnage. The other group is groups, particularly they call them Antifa, but what these are radical leftists who want to reshape the country, particularly communists, who think that systems of capitalism are radically white supremacist and they want to see them all removed. That's who the bulk of these people are. Yes, and what the media wants to do is they so desperately want to find a Trump supporter that beats a shop owner so that they could say, yes, see, it's not just left-wing people. I mean, they're literally lying to you. Again, think about this in the full context. We know, for example, Joe Biden's staff is helped bailing out people that were caught in these riots. We know that all of these left-wing celebrities are bailing out people. Wait a minute, if they're all white supremacist Trump supporters, why are they being bailed out? And again, when I talk, this is literally the type of argument that's being made by some of these people defending this. They say, oh, no. So here's what's happening. You have the protesters, and then if the legitimate protesters start to engage in violence, that's justified violence. But there are opportunists that are from other groups, and that's not justified. So what they're saying is, we can selectively say violence is justified if we agree with it politically. If there's violence we don't agree with politically, then it's not justified. Now, compare that to my stance. The violence isn't justified, period. And ask yourself, which side seems more honest? Which side seems like they're being more consistent with their beliefs?
Well, let's take the example of what's happening with Nike and Amazon, to your point.
Well, can I give you one, Carlos? I want you to hold that thought real quick. We've had somebody respond publicly on social media in real time to this show because they're listening from the City of Williamsport's administration. The current mayor's administration just chimed in. It's his executive assistant. She ran her mouth on social media talking about we needed to have constitutional experts about the protests and everything else. Don't worry. This is a weekly show. We'll come back with a constitutional expert. In fact, there's one named Mark Scaringi. He follows this show on TalkWilliamsport.com. He, just as a heads up, Janice, he's at the Supreme Court The briefs were filed earlier this week by the governor, okay? And I'm checking it right now.
So Janice's position is we shouldn't have our constitutional right to speak about original principles because we're not Obama.
So here's what it says.
No, I want you to absorb that message. We should not be talking because you make us uncomfortable and you're not an expert and you should believe the experts. Correct, Robert?
Well, right. I want to hear, what did she say?
Seconds, yeah. Robert, before you answer this, listen to this. Before you guys go off any further, if the mayor would actually answer his phone or an email for comment before the protest happens, maybe they wouldn't have to virtue signal on social media when we're having a conversation about
it. The mayor's welcome on the show anytime.
You got my
number. The problem is that.
Oh, by the way, he doesn't want to debate. I know firsthand because he canceled on me. I'm sorry. Was that too soon?
Right. Yeah. And let's be fair. The mayor is not a person that's interested in having a conversation with the voters that don't agree with him.
And Carlos, do you want to let everybody know the elephant in the room about me and my relationship with the current mayor before he became the mayor?
Yes, we all voted for him, but I don't want to get off the road because Joe's coming on. I don't want to get off the road. I was
the first guy that endorsed him.
I know. I don't want to get off the road because Joe's coming on, and we will deal.
Robert, I took time from you.
No, I wanted to hear. Yeah.
So my question to Robert is, so what's in it for Nike if they give $5 million to Black Lives Matter Foundation, and Black Lives Matters goes and riots and loots the mom and pop sneaker shops in Williamsport? What's in it for them? Well, Black Lives Matters and the rioters are clearing the competition for them. Same thing with Amazon. They're doing the dirty work for the people who are giving them money. Isn't that true? Does that make sense? I know it's conspiratorially, inflammatory, and it's mean, whatever you want to call it. But if I was Nike, if I was an opposing general in this war, I would give them money for them to go out and loot my competition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think there is truth to that, particularly in the case of Amazon. But what's more than that is this is good publicity and good advertising for them. Because, again, Black Lives Matter and all of the left-wing antics that we see going on here are what's prevailing in the cultural zeitgeist right now. They control the narrative. And so this is the best. Look, you used to have the idea that maybe you would want to what's your incentive to put out, to donate $5 million if you're a company to the Red Cross? Well, because it allows everyone to see, look how virtuous this company is. Don't look at the sweatshops that they're running overseas. Don't look at the shady practices that they have. Look how virtuous they are. That's exactly what this is. And again, you need to look no further than this is exactly how the Democratic Party runs, which is instead of actually, keep in mind, all of these cities, Democratic mayors, Democratic chief of police, Democrat attorney generals, for decades, all dominated by Democrats. Every 4 years, the Democrats come out and pay lip service and say, oh, inner city community, yes, we care about you. The Republicans are racist. They hate you. Other people hate you. It's all about racism. And then people buy into this fake narrative, so they vote Democrats, and then what gets done to help them? Nothing. So the virtue signal, to answer your question quite bluntly, Nike gave $5 million because it's good advertisement for them. And then if they get caught doing stuff that's actually shady to people in poverty and things like that, they could say, pay no heed to that. We gave money to Black Lives Matter. Just like the Democratic Party, just like Amazon, just like Chase Bank. That's what this is. You're muted, Carlos.
Before I bring in Joe, I want to remind everyone that the mayor's executive assistant, I've blocked her on Facebook because she has a habit of deleting Facebook posts that are on her page that have hundreds of comments of conversation, real conversation. I mean, I honored her because she had real conversation, but when it turned and she didn't like what she was hearing, she deleted them. That's censorship. Sorry, I didn't make it up. I didn't invent it. I can't be a part of it. Thanks for playing. Joe Peters is one of the most likable politicians I've ever met. I've been in the business, 40 years. If you don't like Joe Peters and you're in politics, you're a moron. Okay? I met him in my trails going around the state, and I loved his warmth. I loved his intelligence. I loved the way that he dealt with people. I loved the way that he spoke. I love what he stood up for. And we are very fortunate to have him as a guest today. Joe, how are you?
You're muted, Joe.
That
Oh, there you go.
I am well, Carlos. Thank you. I'm much better actually after that kind introduction, which my mother must have emailed you. But
she did, and I even cashed the check.
Thank you, nonetheless. She usually sends cash, so I'm surprised about the check. But
Todd,
how are you guys today? How are you, Robert?
I'm great. It's great to hear from you, Joe.
It's great to hear from you too. Let me just reciprocate, and not out of any obligation, but when I met you guys, I was genuinely impressed. Robert, was a sincere, plain-spoken, factual, candid, honest, willing to listen kind of person, which you don't often get in politics, because politicians want to be on transmit all the time and not receive. And that's probably one of the problems we have with politics today, that people don't listen. And Carlos, just talking to Carlos for 5 minutes lets you know his political acumen and keen insight, and why he's been in the business for, I think you just said 40 years. So it's great to reconnect with you guys. And it just shows you that politics can be civil, because when we met, we were all on different sides in a congressional race. Exactly. And here we are as friends, looking to sort of do the better good for people, politics aside.
Working the system of democracy. So let me start off by asking you this, Joe. By being charged with second-degree murder, does anyone really believe that Derek Chauvin's intention was to kill George Floyd? Because that's effectively what he's been charged with, correct?
He has been charged with second-degree murder. It was increased from third degree. Now, every state is different. And in Pennsylvania, and just sort of speaking generally, second-degree murder is often called felony murder, because it's a murder committed in the course of a felony. In other words, I'm robbing a bank, things get out of hand, I'm trying to escape, I kill somebody on the way out. I didn't go in there intending to murder anybody, but because I chose to participate in that felony, any consequences, and perhaps even if someone is killed not by me, by someone else, because of the incident that I put into motion, I'm responsible. So that's kind of in between, first degree homicide or murder one, where you intend to commit the murder, and third degree, which is kind of all other types of homicide. It's a situation where if you're going to do this felony, you are responsible. You bought the consequences.
Joe, just real quick before we go further, can you just briefly talk about your background in law enforcement, and so how you understand a lot of these complicated positions?
Sure. I actually started as a police officer in Scranton. I was supposed to be my parents' doctor, and I'll never forget telling them that I wanted to change from pre-med to criminal justice, because I wanted to be an undercover cop, and I can still see the color draining from their faces like a thermometer. But they supported me, God bless them. And so I was a police officer working undercover and in uniform in Scranton, and then decided to go to law school, and did that. And over the years, I went from street cop to being director of the state's Bureau of Narcotics Investigations, which are all of the attorney general's undercover narcotics agents who work with the state troopers in that capacity. So I was the chief of police of those statewide narcotics agents. And then with my law degree, I started in the attorney general's office as a line drug prosecutor, actually as a law clerk, and then was fortunately hired, and then worked my way up to being the executive deputy attorney general for drugs and organized crime, and actually served, I think, 6 different elected attorneys general in Pennsylvania of both parties over the course of about 17 years. I was also asked to be a special federal prosecutor and worked with the Department of Justice as a special mafia prosecutor in Philadelphia for a number of years. My team and myself and so many proudly obtained the convictions of a mafia boss named Little Nicky Scarfo in Philly, and 16 of his henchmen who committed 9 murders, including a judge and all kinds of other activity. And then from there, was fortunate enough to be asked to go to the White House. Was one of the deputy drug czars under 2 presidents of 2 different political stripes. I worked 2 years under George W. Bush, 2 years under Bill Clinton. But I think it's sort of testament not to me, but to the notion that these issues, whether it's terrorism or drugs or everything in between, should not be political issues. There are no, Republican or Democratic drug dealers or terrorists. And then after that, I worked around the world on issues of terrorism and drugs and technology. And then even now do occasional commentary on the Fox News channel in all of these subject areas.
Okay, go ahead, Todd. Yeah.
Go ahead, Robert.
Okay,
and then Todd.
Yeah, as someone who's been through all areas of law enforcement, a cop on the beat, and rose up, went to law school, how difficult is it as someone who's an attorney general or someone who's a prosecutor or a lawyer to look at a case that's ambiguous? Not necessarily saying the George Floyd case, but we often hear that anytime someone's killed in custody or someone's killed in the context of an arrest being made, a lot of people want to assume that that's always negligent. As someone who's involved in law enforcement, even at the legal level, how difficult is it for you to, in good faith effort, look at those situations and try to determine whether or not unnecessary force was used and that police officers should be charged with these crimes?
It's always difficult. And let me first say that the George Floyd incident is heinous and sad and unnecessary. And I don't know of any cop or prosecutor who thinks otherwise. In these kinds of cases, and putting that one aside, because I think that one is right, so clear. And fortunately, because in today's world, different than when I was a street cop, you don't have videos. Not everybody's carrying a cell phone. You don't have body-worn cameras by the police. You don't have all kinds of outdoor video cameras. So in every incident today, you almost always have that video, which is, some of the best evidence that you can get. Now, granted, videos can be edited, and granted, people on TV like to show snippets of videos and not necessarily what preceded it or what followed it. So you need to be a little wary, but you know that you have some pretty decent evidence. And I think police officers and some of my sisters and brothers in law enforcement will disagree, but I think we need to be held to a higher standard, because we, among very few in our nation, are allowed to take a life. Even doctors, they swear an oath, Hippocratic oath, to save a life and do no harm. We are given the right to take a life. And I think because of that, and because of the powers we have to invade the civil liberties of people, I think there is a little libertarian, even in the most strident Democrat or person on the left. And again, not bringing politics into it, but if you're going to invade somebody's right, if I'm going to, or my team is going to wiretap somebody, you better be damn sure that you have the requisite probable cause and judicial authorization before you do that, because you have the ability that no one else has. So if someone has the ability to take a life or to invade someone's privacy, then I think you need to be held to a higher standard. And I think, fast forwarding to the incident in Minneapolis, I think one of the reasons those officers were fired right away, and this is just my speculation, was because if you're a chief and one of your officers is suspected of wrongdoing, there's a difference between an internal investigation where the officer has certain rights because of collective bargaining and because of processes and policies within the department that they wouldn't have as a citizen. So if they had allowed those officers to remain on the force and simply suspended them pending an investigation, those officers would have had additional rights, and this would have languished much longer. And there are dangers and complications, not to get too technical, when you're running an internal investigation, which is administrative in nature, concurrently with a criminal investigation. So by firing those officers, it made them citizens right away and allowed the general civil criminal process to proceed unimpeded, so to speak, by the rights the officers would have in an internal investigation.
Two brilliant points, Joe. Two brilliant points. Todd.
Joe, first of all, thanks for taking the time with us on a Saturday. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Todd. Good to talk to you too.
One of the things that's come up here recently is, with the protests, the need for permitting, and then, certain administrations saying, well, because it's a breaking news story, we don't have a need to do that, a week removed. With your vast experience at every level, of the system, what's your sense of protesting and are they spontaneous? Do they need to be permitted? And what your sense of that is?
Permitting is a good idea because it allows the municipality, which is primarily the jurisdiction that's the front line, so to speak, and not to make this adversarial. So permitting allows both sides the breathing room and the planning opportunities so that there can be a peaceful protest. I'm a firm believer that those who are justifiably protesting the death of Mr. Floyd, that they should be allowed to protest as stridently, as long, as vociferously, but as peacefully as they want to. Then there's a line, gentlemen, and to your listeners, ladies and gentlemen, between protesting and rioting.
Right.
And those are two different worlds. And the rioting is unexcusable. The rioting was by people oftentimes who have nothing to do with the issue or the jurisdiction. Most of the people arrested in cities around the country where there have been arrests of rioters, not protesters, are people from outside the area. So you have groups, and Antifa, it could be white anarchists, it could be all kinds of people, but let's take Antifa as an example. They are hijacking this legitimate protest. They are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd to advance their anarchistic agenda.
Right.
They are organized, not unlike a terrorist group or the mafia. They have leadership, they have planning, they move people, they position fuel with gasoline for Molotov cocktails, they pre-stage rocks and bricks, they have scouts on bikes who, when the cops are in one area, advance to a different area and then radio their comrades that this is an area where there aren't any police, we can move in and loot and steal and rob. And they are about destroying the fabric of who we are and our government and police. And you know what? In in third world countries, and I've been around the world, one of the things you want to do first when it comes to taking over a nation is to shake the confidence of the people in the authorities. And once you do that, you replace your own leadership. You instill confidence in people and take over, and then you own them and control them. And not to be
tactics, yeah.
And not to be extreme, but that's what this is all about. That's what the rioters are all about.
Bolshevik tactics, correct, Robert?
Yeah, I totally agree. Joe, let me ask you something real quick that I think you'd uniquely be able to answer. Was the length of time that it took to arrest Chauvin, was that an acceptable amount of time? And just a real follow-up to that, is it different? Is it harder? Does it take a slightly longer to charge a police officer with a crime like this? Because, like you said, they're one of the only groups in the country that can legally be allowed to use lethal force?
I don't know if it's harder, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, there needs to be that higher level of responsibility. Mm-hmm. And if you are going to show that someone breached that responsibility and obligation, I think you want to have as thorough an investigation as possible. And this was a very quick arrest. Right. Part of it was catalyzed by firing them first. But oftentimes these cases are put into a grand jury, and you have witnesses, and you subpoena all the video you can find, your phone records, all kinds of things. And then after weeks, sometimes months, a charge will come out. So this was very swift, relatively speaking. And I know I answered your second question. What was your first question? No. Oh, was it, did the 6 or 9 minutes, was it too long? Yeah, I think it was too long. I don't know what the hell, excuse my French, why that officer was on top of that defendant at that point, that alleged criminal actor, for that long. You know, you put them down, you immobilize them as necessary quickly, you put the cuffs on them, and it's game over. Once they're detained and restrained, you are done. There's no more shenanigans. There's no more need for force. They're immobilized. So, you know, in that first minute that officer was on top of George Floyd, there should have been cuffs on him and a search of his body to be sure there were no weapons or contraband, and done. The spectacle of sitting there like that all that time, and the other officers just standing around, you know, and one officer, I think it was his 4th day on the job.
Correct.
That's where all of the wrongs came in.
Right. In your experience, so on that incident, and we could unpack this for 2 hours. Okay, the police officer that's been on duty for 4 days, how does he override? Because he did question, why aren't we putting him in the car? Why aren't we putting him in the car? We have him handcuffed. Chauvin decided not to, and decided to keep him on the ground until the ambulance arrived. That was the quote from the attorney of the police officer that was on duty for 4 days. That being said, in your experience, is there a difference between police brutality and racism in your experience?
Police brutality is brutality no matter the color of the victim. And I can't get into the head of that officer. And, you know, God forbid he acted the way he acted because Mr. Floyd was black. My sense is that kind of officer would have acted the same way if Mr. Floyd was white or any other ethnicity. Now, I don't know that. That's just speculation.
Nobody does, right?
When you have a bad actor, when you have a bad cop, they're going to act the same way no matter who they are sort of lording over. And you ask about that 4-day cop. Yeah, you're intimidated as a rookie because you don't want to override another senior officer. But guess what? You raised your hand. You want to wear the badge and carry the gun. You better push your responsibility forward and step in to clearly to save a life and prevent a disaster.
Cowboy up, we call it in the business.
Joe, Rob again. Let me ask you this: as someone who's been involved in a lot of areas of law enforcement, What does it do to an officer on the ground when there is a narrative that's being pushed not only by political leaders, by mayors in cities that are in charge of these police forces, by large multinational companies, that police officers are all racist and police forces are systemically racist? What does that do to the average cop on the street's morale and how they want to approach their job?
It's very debilitating, Robert, to the morale of an entire department, because you every day do your job. You leave your house and your family or whomever, and you hope to return that night, and nobody knows what it's like. And then on top of it, after an incident like this, people are sneering at you, making comments, not wanting to serve you in restaurants, and on and on and on. So it is very difficult. Now, the good cops and the smart cops embrace the opportunity to right a wrong and correct things going forward. And the downside for the public, and in fact, the very minorities that are looking to be protected, or if there are wrongs, to have those wrongs righted, they're going to be at a disadvantage, because guess what? The police in those areas are going to be very reluctant now to do the job that they're put there to do because of all the eyes on them. And they're going to pull back, some consciously and some unconsciously, of being as aggressive within the bounds of the law that they would have normally to prevent crime and to solve crime. So the very people we're looking to help are going to be hurt, because officers are going to second guess themselves. And that's how people get hurt and killed too. When cops, where you might have drawn a weapon or pulled out, your mace or whatever, now you're second guessing. And sometimes that second or two can cause the death of an innocent bystander or yourself or another officer. So everybody loses when there is misinformation that all police are racist or are monsters.
Can you walk Joe into what happened in Buffalo and today's announcement that they've been arrested?
So Joe, earlier today, right, and you heard about the more than 50 police officers that have resigned from the special response team, for lack of a better term, in Buffalo after clearing the plaza, and then two of the uniformed guys were already suspended and in the process of being removed from the Buffalo police force. Well, what's happened today is those two have now been formally charged a day after more than 50 have basically walked off the job, not as police officers, but as part of that unit. And then if you could just respond to that and just your sense of it. And I also have a follow-up as well.
Yeah. That incident, and again, I saw a clip of it. I didn't see what came before and what happened after. But, in that clip, that officer's actions, in my view, only based on that limited information, were not justified. Now, granted, they were ordered by superior officers, the chief, the deputy chief, whomever, to clear that area. That's fine. That doesn't mean you use force beyond what is necessary. I mean, what I saw was, that older gentleman, and he is an older gentleman, and you got to take that into consideration in terms of, is he a threat? He was talking to those officers and maybe didn't respond immediately to being asked to be moved. That doesn't justify pushing an older man like that. You talk, you walk toward him, you make it clear to him that he's got to move, or that there will be sort of escalation of, force if necessary. That's one thing in obeying a legitimate police order. It's another thing just because, and again, I don't like bad cops. Good cops don't like bad cops. So just because you're a cop and you want to show that you're in charge and you're going to be a tough guy and push an old man because he didn't respond immediately, to me, that's not right. Now, the notion of 40 some members of that special unit resigning from that unit, now, to me, that's kind of a bridge too far too. I mean, one of the things Just like we want public order, we need order and discipline within a police department, within the military, within a company. In corporate America, you just don't do what you want to do. So for those cops to say, oh, I don't like the fact of how you treated that officer, so we're all going to resign from the unit, oh, no, you're not. If you get assigned to that unit, you work that unit. If you want to resign, then you resign from being a police officer if you can't take a lawful order for the good of the community and the good of the department. So I was surprised to see them do that. You want to be a brave guy and make a statement? Go ahead. Resign from the department. Don't pick and choose what duties you want to do, because next you'll be picking and choosing what laws you want to enforce and against whom you want to enforce them. And it brings us right back to the problems we're dealing with today.
And Joe, to that point, that's my follow-up, and exactly where I was going to go. You read my mind. Having served in the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General for more than 15 years, I was with the governor yesterday and was asking very pointed questions about the comments that he had made on Thursday about getting with Attorney General Shapiro and trying to rewrite what are commonly referred to as the red flag laws and guidance. It was very striking to see the rebuke that came from the head of the union representing the Pennsylvania State Police. What is your sense where we are right now in the state of Pennsylvania more broadly as a country in the treatment of law enforcement? Because when you have family members, as I do, that are in law enforcement and they're taking, thrown bricks and thrown rocks and bottles, just by the mere fact of doing their job and being in that uniform, what would you say to them? And then, back to my original question of where we are as law enforcement, as a community, and going forward from the AG and governor's standpoint.
We are, I hate to say it, but we are losing good cops, and we are disincentivizing bright, young, capable women and men who care about helping citizens. We are disincentivizing them from going into law enforcement. And that's a sad day. And, I liken it in a strange sort of way to what the military went through during and after Vietnam. Today, and it's ironic because we've come to full circle in opposite ways when you're looking at police today and of yesterday when they were more respected, and the military today very respected. Back during Vietnam, not so much. And again, through no fault of their own, a soldier coming back from Vietnam was, spit upon and disgraced, and people didn't even want to say that they had served in Vietnam because of the lack of respect and the misinformation and the propagandizing. Those soldiers were sent there not because they wanted to go to do a job and then not to respect them. Today we've changed that, and now we thank people in the military for their service. In law enforcement, we've gone the other way.
I know Robert probably has one more question. Let me just jump in and ask you one more. Was that the most conflicting part of your service while working as a police officer? Bad cops?
Probably. Because when you're a cop, you rely on your partner. You rely on, and oftentimes you work alone too, and there's no partner, but you rely on your sisters and brothers because they're sort of the last bastion. They're the ones who are going to save you and back you up and get you home at night. And when you can't count on everybody in that department as making the right decisions, it weakens the entire department. The least capable person, the person with the least amount of ethics, is the brick that brings down the entire foundation. I remember developing some technology for the Secret Service, and we built this very sophisticated, I can't talk about what it did, but machine, let's call it a machine. And I remember the chief of technology at the Secret Service saying, this is all great, but I need it to be agent proof. I need my most inexperienced, my most incapable technically agent to be able to operate it. So it just kind of, I'll never forget that discussion. And whether it's that or you're talking about ethics among police officer, the weakest link is the most critical one. And we need, there are bad apples in every group. And I saw a comedian recently, and he made a good point. We can't have bad apples in law enforcement. The risk is too great. Just like you can't have bad apples as pilots. Right. The risk is too great.
Robert?
Yeah, and I just want to say about the situation in Buffalo, I do agree with you. I think that it's being exaggerated by exactly what these police officers did. But, people that just tell the story are like, they punched him and shoved him to the ground. It wasn't a brutal use of force like we saw with George Floyd, but I still think that it was over the line. But I just wanted to say real quick with my last question is that I think you're the exact same type of person we need in a position of leadership, because you understand the importance of not demonizing all law enforcement and the importance of law enforcement, but you also understand the importance of holding them to a higher standard of accountability. And so in that vein, I just wanted to ask you, do you have, just real quick, some suggestions of what we could do to try to curb these bad cops and to curb police brutality in the situations we're seeing?
Well, we need to police ourselves first. If you don't want anybody to police you, police yourselves and let everybody see that you're doing a good job at that. And I think it's not a bad thing to have outside scrutiny as well. I think we need to sort of engage the community better. You could be the toughest cop with the biggest gun and the fastest car and, think you're in a movie, but you can't lose sight of the fact that it's about being smart, not just tough. And it's about not losing sight of those whom you serve. And it's about working with them. And in the areas like Detroit, where you didn't see rioting, you saw protesting, it didn't migrate that next level to rioting. You know why? I think one of the things that they've done very adroitly in Detroit was they have been over time embedding themselves in working with community leaders. And those community leaders know the cops are their friends. And by having a relationship already, rather than now scrambling in this moment of adversity, trying to create relationships. If you already have that, the community leaders become your best friends. I saw that in working with Somali first-generation residents in a state in the Midwest where they were having problems with their second-generation Somali youth being groomed by terrorists over the internet. And one of the most artful tools in stopping that was to work with the elders in that community who were offended that their kids and grandkids wanted to become terrorists, and became the most important tool well beyond wiretaps and investigations and undercover operations. So I think it's that integration. And also, what's ironic is the people that need the police the most are now going to be the people that see less of the police if you start cutting budgets. The people in the inner city, I remember, leading a group into an area of Philadelphia when I was the director of the state narcotics, into an area where cops didn't want to go. They didn't go because it was safer not to go. And, we just said enough is enough. And, with force, within the bounds of the law, we basically marched in there and took that neighborhood over. And if I tell you, it still makes, it's almost tearful when I think back of mothers coming out on the porch, single mothers, minority mothers who were trying to raise their children and feed them and work and provide a life for them, applauding the police because they didn't see police and they were stuck in their houses forever. And the best evidence of how that neighborhood turned around, because then they worked with us, they took their neighborhood back. They kept their neighborhood safe. And I had one say to me, you know what, Mr. Peters, thank you. Now we have the baby pools again out front, and I wasn't sure what she meant. And what she meant was, you know, in inner city Philadelphia, there aren't yards, and people, you know, going outside means sitting on your stoop or sitting on your step right there on the sidewalk. She said, no, you have to understand. Now we can have our little plastic swimming pools that we fill with water for our kids to play in, and we don't have to worry about drive-by shootings and drug dealers. So we can't lose sight of the fact that those are the people that we raise our hand to serve, and a lot of this nonsense is going to take that away from them.
So those are great tools. And in that thought, what does tomorrow look like in law enforcement when nobody on any side trusts the government and media?
Well, it's going to be difficult for law enforcement. As I've mentioned, you're going to see a reluctance to take action because an officer is not going to want to end up with an edited video that makes it look like he or she did something wrong. And I think the media has an obligation, and I, you know, every time I appear on the Fox News channel or do a show like yours or give my opinion, I'm conscious of the fact that I can't be slanted in my view. There can't be an agenda because people, you know, like it or not, if people see it in the newspaper, they assume it's true. If they watch it on TV, it has to be true. It was on TV. And you have so many reporters who have lost their way from being journalists to commentators under the guise of being a journalist. So whether they're writing a story as a reporter, as a print journalist, or they're talking on TV as a reporter, they become commentators and they weave their personal view or the view of the day, right or wrong, into their writing or into their commentary. You know, there's a guy, and I'll leave him nameless, who is an Associated Press reporter who is on MSNBC frequently, and nothing personally against him, but you know, and it's just my view or my interpretation of what he's saying. He's not reporting; he's jumping on the bandwagon and commentating. And I think to myself, you know, the AP used to be the standard of independent, objective reporting. If the AP said it, you can count on it. Other reporters and networks would rely on them. We still do on election night. You know, if you think about it, the AP has called the race for so-and-so. So to have an AP reporter on a political commentary morning show is part of the problem that we have. So I think the media is hurt because of that. I think law enforcement's going to be hurt. And I think society is not going to be any better because of what we're doing to all of its underpinnings, including the police. Not that there don't have to be corrections. They're due. But you can't paint with such a broad brush and hurt the very people you're purporting to help.
As we phase out, tell us what's next for the great Joe Peters.
Well, cutting my dad's lawn immediately. I don't know. I have been blessed, and I thank God and all those people with whom I worked for so many years to have allowed me to be a part of a team that has hopefully accomplished some things and changed lives of people that, you know, you're never going to meet. So I kind of, in life, and, you know, my parents may look at my career path as, can't you keep a job? I look at it as, you know, opportunities finding me where I think I can contribute and participate. So is it something political? Is it something, you know, in government? Is it something that I do on my own as I'm doing now to try and contribute? I don't know. I guess I'll continue to let it find me as much as I try and look for it.
So you're saying medical school's off the table then, Joe? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've ruled it out. My parents have it. They're still hopeful, but it's getting a little late in the game for me to do that. Unfortunately, my baby brother redeemed me by becoming the physician that they were looking for.
Now, you can be honest, and it's just us guys here, okay? You became
And nobody
a
else
cop.
is listening, right?
Right.
Just us.
You became a cop because you had a great fill of Serpico and Prince of the City movies, right?
Yes.
I knew it.
I think it's all of those. It's funny that something can impact you at a point in your life where you're either vulnerable or open to it, which plants a seed, which then becomes that green shoot and that growth from that point to you doing something hopefully meaningful.
Well, we're in your debt for coming on and enlightening
and
us.
I yours for having this dialogue
and informing us. And I think that every single point that you made is something that we can look back and absorb and share. And thank you so much for coming on. We would love to have you on again in the future. And you have our sincerest thanks.
Well, it's my pleasure and happy to do it, and glad to speak with you again. And thanks for you guys, when I say guys because you're all guys, but providing this platform, not only for yourselves, but more importantly for your listeners. And I thank them for listening to me today as well.
Thank you, Joe.
See you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
God
Appreciate
bless.
it.
See you. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
So I'd like to, before I move on to a couple of different other subjects at 12:45 with 15 minutes left, can you, Todd, talk to, tell us your thoughts about what happened with the New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees this week and his comments of not supporting people who disrespect the flag and the blowback that he got and his eventual apology?
I can, but I just want to give you guys a heads up that Janice is taking back to Facebook and going, hey, he's a pretty good guest, pretty level of expertise. I mean, federal prosecutors, state attorney general guy, police officer. I mean, Janice is saying he was pretty good about the protest thing.
We're just trying to make a name for ourselves. That's the only thing we're trying to do.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Drew Brees. So Drew Brees tried to get it right, and apparently, according to the world, he got it wrong. So if I may, Drew tried to come out and show support for the flag that, by the way, Robert is sitting in front of, honoring.
That's the American flag, by the way.
Right. Honoring the fighting men and women. And ironically enough, we're on the anniversary day of D-Day today, right?
And the first game of Little League ever.
Right.
81st
So
anniversary.
He's trying to pay respect to the fighting men and women. He's trying to give respect to his teammates, right? At the same time to pay attention. And he's absolutely eviscerated. I have news for everybody listening. And if we ever post the Zoom call, the video that would watch this, everyone is entitled to their opinion without having to be shellacked. This is the United States of America. We do have a free press. We do have free speech. Other places don't have that. So when we go out and we marginalize somebody for having an opinion that they strongly believe in, okay, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. I really, really do. So Drew Brees has gone out. He's apologized. He said, I'm sorry. I got it wrong. I did this, did that. And now the Twitterverse and the social media verse, they're crucifying the guy. Well, excuse me. I spoke to the governor yesterday, and he owned what he said he was inconsistent on in regard to protesting while during a yellow-face guidance that said you're not allowed to have groups of more than 25. So if the governor of Pennsylvania is allowed to own that issue and move on and continue to address issues and everything else, why does Drew Brees have to retire? When did that happen?
Look, here's the problem Drew Brees made. You want to know what the problem was? Apologizing.
Exactly.
You do not give in to the mob, period. If you stick your ground, this is how I deal. I just, again, debated 7 hours of left-wing people. You know, as soon as you start to talk about this and say, I think that race is being used to divide us, oh, you're a racist. I refuse to listen to that. I am not a racist. I know what's in my heart. And I'm sick and tired of people trying to use the fact that they have this bully power because the narrative is dominated by people that agree with that agenda. I mean, think about this. Do you really, this is such a terrible country and no one's listening to the cause and no one thinks Black Lives Matter? Yet somehow the one celebrity that comes out and says, well, let's not forget to honor the flag is browbeat to the point where he's groveling to them now. But we're supposed to believe the opposite, that somehow, oh, no, that the people in culture and positions of leadership, they don't care about Black Lives Matter. They don't care about this. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sick and tired of these people saying that free speech only means that they get to speak. And when someone else speaks with a counter opinion, they have to browbeat them. They'll, oh, get this person fired. He shouldn't be allowed to do his job. And what ends up happening is people now, because that pressure, it's not a First Amendment issue in the sense that no one's saying the government's infringing on rights, but there are dangers to self-censorship because you allow the public outrage mob to put fear in you. And so now we have this public censorship where, oh, well, I can only say certain things. Like, let me give you an example real quick, Todd. See what you think about this. Let's assume that Governor Wolf really believes what he's saying about COVID, okay? That if we have these lockdown protests and things like that, it could spread the disease. So just for a minute, the incredible leap that Tom Wolf cares about this state, let's assume that's the case for a minute. That man, there is no possible way that he could have came out and said, please don't go out and protest the death of George Floyd because you're going to be violating my orders on social distancing. Why? Because he knows the outrage mob would have been so severe and would have came at him so hard that it wouldn't have been worth it. So instead, he has to deny what he thinks is best for the state because that's the power of this outrage mob. And every single time you apologize to that mob, it is never enough. They always want more. They always want to squeeze more blood from that turnip. And so now Drew Brees will spend the rest of his professional career. Hopefully he could just distract from this and it goes away. But anytime it's brought up, he will need to grovel more and more, and it will never be enough.
And you're racist if you don't agree with us. Moving on to Biden, and it is 12:52. We have 8 minutes left. Plus, we have final thoughts from everyone. Robert, 15%. Just not very good people. And if you don't vote Democrat, you ain't black. And he believes that all cops are racists. Why is this not considered divisive?
It's the same old story. It's again because they control the narrative. Like, go back to the conventions in 2016 with the Republican and Democrat convention. The narrative was Donald Trump and the Republican convention was fear. It was a dark, dark picture of this country. But the Democrats' picture was love. Now, I watched both conventions. You know what they both did? Talked about how the country would be devastated if the other person won. Yet somehow, because one was a Democrat and one was a Republican, the one that was a Democrat, oh, it's a message of hope. It wasn't fearful when she was saying half of the country's deplorable and that if you elect Trump, we'll be locking up gay people or locking up black people. None of that was considered dark or fearful. It's the same with Joe Biden. If Trump would have said any of the things, imagine that Trump said that. Imagine if Trump was like, well, if black people don't vote for me, they're not really black. There would have been a million people marching in Washington saying that proved that Trump was a racist. Imagine if Trump would have said 15% of this country are bad people, implying that it was people on the left. People would have been outraged. But this is Joe Biden, though. He calls his own supporters lying dog-faced pony soldiers. So, the guy's losing it. He's, I'm sorry to say that he seems to have medical deficiencies and he seems infirmed. And so he's just a puppet that they're putting out there. The entire candidacy, him winning this is the fact that the media is propping up someone who is saying divisive stuff, who's saying nonsensical stuff. The big thing that Joe Biden did, it's not even him. Never forget this, everyone who's listening. Joe Biden's team, as we speak, is putting up bail money for the people that got arrested for rioting. That's what Joe Biden said, and that's not divisive. Apparently, I learned this week. If I'm against riots, I'm divisive. If I'm for the riots, that's being inclusive. That's how insane this has become.
Final thoughts, Todd.
Guys, I got to tell you, my son graduated high school last night in a COVID-19 graduation ceremony in Loyalsock Township, Pennsylvania. And My wife got to present him as a district employee with his diploma. That's just a phenomenal moment. Amazing speakers. Last night, the kids did a great job. The three speakers that we had from the kids' standpoint, the administration went above and beyond what they needed to do on a big screen. Everybody had a blast. I'm going to tell you a little secret. Don't tell the governor. There was not a lot of social distancing going on, even in the parking lot. Okay, so that said, it was wonderful. What amounted to a class photo was taken on the football field. Just
saw it.
They pulled out all the stops. They really, really did an amazing job in unprecedented circumstances. And I can't thank the Lowestoft Township School District enough for the education they provided our son, of course, our daughters in another class that will be graduating in a couple of years. Not going to give that secret away either until she graduates. But just to see everybody again back together and the kids and the grown-ups and just the outpouring of support for the class of 2020, not just at Lowestoft, but throughout the state of Pennsylvania, throughout the country. They've really, really earned their diplomas this year. And to see the class gift
that's for sure
that was bestowed on the district last night, the groundbreaking will be probably in July sometime. I invite everybody to come out. If you ever get a chance to go to an athletic event or a band show or anything that's going on in the fall when we get back to after green, right? It'll just be great. So congratulations, class of 2020, and my son, Alex.
Congrats. That's
final thoughts, Roberto.
I think what to take from this is we're talking about the idea of the narrative. We are being lied to and being divided by our leaders. They do not care about the average Americans in this country. And they know that if they cause division, they could keep getting away with it. That's the only way they can maintain power, by totally controlling the narrative, by trying to stop voices like ours that are telling the truth, and by keeping us all divided. We know the same people that said trust the experts or we're all going to die from COVID. Now those experts are saying, oh, no, COVID's not that big deal. As long as you're protesting police brutality, then the COVID can't harm you. But if you want to just go back to work, then the COVID could still harm you. That's what these same experts that we were told we had to blindly trust said. Never forget that on every issue they talk about. They are lying to you. When they say you have to shut up and just listen to them because they're obviously right, they're lying. And it's the same type of mentality that says if you're wearing a MAGA hat, that's violence. But if you're punching someone in the face that wears a MAGA hat, that's free speech. It was violence to want to protest Whitmer or protest Tom Wolf for this lockdown. That was terrible and harmful and violent. But it's free speech to be lighting cities on fire. That's who these people are, and you should never forget it. So the next time you hear a story that talks about how Donald Trump's a Nazi or how you're a terrible person or a racist if you don't vote a certain way, remember, these people will lie to your face so much that they'll literally say, if you want to go back to your job, you're immoral and you're going to kill people because of COVID. But people that are burning down cities, they're noble patriots that COVID can't affect.
Yeah. My final thoughts start with every single person on this show detests what happened in Minneapolis to George Floyd. It's toxic. It's apparent. It's brutality. You know it when you see it. But I want to tell you that I would ask you to always remember that what people were told and accept it in good faith, that they could not attend their loved ones for special events or for their last moments in this life, nor could they attend the funerals of those that they lost. I want to make sure that you understand that those people, they're voting this November. And if the numbers say that there are 100,000 deaths because of COVID, that's 100,000 people that didn't get to see their loved ones in their last moment in life, and their families, they're voting. So this is the hill. This is the hill that we die on, because you must protect yourself at all times, especially after the bell. So get out in any way you can and involve yourself, but more importantly, educate yourself while doing so. Stand on your own 2 feet with respect to the ideas that you believe in politically and then live them. Nothing these people are going to do reduces racism. On the contrary, it might cause it, and at the very least, it might leave us with the feeling that we just don't care about George Floyd. So be careful what you say and what you do. There's not and will never be a greater barrier to racism or tyranny in any form than the American ideal of we are all created equal. How beautiful is that? The elite want to rob us of our future. I speak for Todd and Robert when I say that we pledge our life, our fortune, and our sacred honor to stopping them. This is Pushback. We'll see you next week.